Well, just so you know, Betta, Donovan's joined.
Welcome, Donovan.
Thank you. I'm trying to get my video, but hopefully it works.
We can't see you yet.
That's weird. Okay, so I just clicked the button and it's...
Let's see. It might just be a little delayed thing.
Okay.
We will maybe, yeah, okay. And John, we also still can't see you. Nope, now we can. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's weird. That's odd that you can't see me. Let me try it again. Stop video.
We hope I'll be able to see you, but if not, we can hear you, and that's the important thing.
Okay.
So, should we just get started? Yeah. Okay. All right. I want to respect everyone's time. I know it's Thursday evening, almost TGIF, and really glad that you could make it to learn all about renewable heat. I'm Betta Broad.
I'm Ciovacco.
And we are here at the New Yorkers for Clean Power office in Kingston. And we're doing these online teach-ins, ideally once a month, about different topics that New Yorkers for Clean Power is working on. Our priorities are accelerating the transition to renewable energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and sorry, I hear a little bit of a background noise there. And so this month we decided to focus on renewable heat because it's clearly a very key priority in our transition to clean energy. And we're delighted that we have these amazing speakers for you all to hear from tonight. And you'll also be able to ask questions if you're watching on Zoom. If you're watching via Facebook, you won't. But please, my Zoom audience out there, please take advantage of the Q&A, which is in the middle of the bar, and it should be at the bottom of your screen in the middle of the bar, and you can just type in a question as we go along, and then at the end, Michaela and I will go through and read them and make sure that your presenters answer your questions. We always have a lot of great questions on these, so keep them coming. So tonight we're going to be hearing from John Ciovacco, the president of Aztech Geothermal, Zeyneb Magavi, who is a district heating advocate with Mothers Out Front, and Donovan Gordon, the director of renewable heating and cooling at NYSERDA. And sorry we can't see you, Donovan, but we'll hear you, and that's good. And then I'm also going to be speaking a little bit about our Renewable Heat Now campaign and the Heat Smart campaigns that are just taking off across the state, which is super exciting. So first, we wanted to show just a really short video to get you warmed up about geothermal and how it works. It's only 2 minutes, so check it out.
Heating and cooling your home account for more than half the energy in a typical home, making it the largest expense and largest greenhouse gas emitter. But did you know that even though the weather around us changes throughout the year, the ground underneath is able to stay at a constant temperature all year round? That's because the ground soaks up 44% of the sun's rays and stores it like a battery. What if we were able to put this ground battery to good use? That's exactly what a ground source heating and cooling system does. How does it work? Underground pipe systems installed access the ground temperatures. In the summertime, the earth is cooler than your home, so excess heat from the home is transferred to the ground. The warmer water comes in contact with the ground and naturally cools off and returns to your home. Your home. Taking advantage of the sun's energy that's stored underground, so no source from the cooling system and homeowners can benefit. They're quieter and more efficient operation. In fact, every unit of energy that these systems use. new construction. York Geo.
All right. Just a little intro video for you. So now we were thinking about, John, do you still want to go next? Or, oh, we're a little bit of a echo. Could that be from Facebook?
Possibly.
Should we try to mute that? Sorry, folks, technological difficulty.
So
all right.
I have Donovan's slides, so I could run his slides or I can go first. Doesn't matter. But I can share his.
Okay, that would be great. So Donovan, does that sound like a plan to you since we can't access your screen?
Yeah, that's fine. If you want me to go first, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So John is going to get your slides up, and you can see the screen, right, Donovan? We just can't see you.
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Okay. So did we see Donovan's slides?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Does Donovan know what slide we have up?
Yes, I do.
Oh, good.
I can see it, John. So yeah, well, I know we're on the cover page, so we can just go. So again, Donovan Gordon, Director of Clean Heating and Cooling. I'm going to talk a little about some of the programs we have, some of the initiatives that we've been directed to do through DPS, and also talk about a little bit about what's going on in Westchester, because as most of you are aware, there's a moratorium on new gas connections. So we're doing some things to help in that area as well. So I guess we can go to the next slide.
Working on it.
Okay.
Next slide. It's good?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. So I just want to sort of give sort of a general overview. This is sort of the rapid goals. There have been other goals that have been set up since then, but the ones I really want to stick with is the 40% reduction in greenhouse gases from 1990 levels. That's by 2030. And then by 2050, we want to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% from our 1990 levels. So really aggressive carbon reduction goals. So we can go to the next page. I won't dwell on the other parts. So why is the topic of clean heating and cooling relevant in New York State? Well, a third of all of the carbon emissions in New York State comes from buildings, the HVAC systems in residential and commercial buildings. About 41 to 2% comes from transportation, so we do need more EVs. About 20% comes from electric generation. So we have one of the cleanest grids in the country. And as car manufacturers make more electric vehicles, that will take care of itself. We don't make vehicles here, but we can directly impact buildings through various means. So now we're introducing sort of a new concept, new term of art called beneficial electrification through heat pumps, because it can help decarbonize the heating and cooling sector. The reason why we say beneficial electrification, because for years now, a heat pump have not really gotten a lot of, well, it's gotten attention, but not a lot of support, because DPS and others have said, well, it increases load. And all of the either environmentalists or focus on using less energy efficiency. So, but because so much carbon comes from buildings, and we want to electrify heatings with heat pumps that does not emit any carbon on site, we use the term beneficial electrification. So there is a benefit to society for increasing the electric usage rather than using fossil fuels for heating. So in the cooling mode, it is the most efficient air conditioner. on the market and the planet. So you use less electricity for cooling, which helps reduce peak demand. And in heating, it replaces fossil fuel heating. You don't need gas or oil or propane to heat your building, and it does lead to savings and bill savings in the long run, particularly against oil and propane. And again, I do want to emphasize, one of the things my group I want to try to figure out how to quantify is the increased health benefits with no carbon monoxide produced on site. You don't need a carbon monitor in your home anymore once you install the heat pump. Next slide, please. So this is a typical home. I can get another slide that's more relevant, that's specifically New York State, but is similar. That most of the energy consumed in a house, in a home, average home, is space heating, water heating, and space cooling. People think that most of the energy is you turn on the lights, but it's actually not. It's the thermal side that uses the most energy. It uses the most energy, and it's producing significant amounts of carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting slide. A electric utility, on average, in New York State, is operating at 54% capacity annually. They have to design an electric grid for the summer peak. It's a cooling dominant electric grid because they have to have enough electricity for the hottest of days when everybody's got their air conditioning on. Conversely, in the winter, we're using fossil fuels for heating, so there's lots of capacity in the wintertime. So electrification of heating right now for the foreseeable future, we think at least the next decade or so, there's enough electrical capacity in the grid as it is right now to accommodate heat pumps. And this would actually more utilize the system much better and more efficient. And quite frankly, each point of increase in utilization, you go from 54% to 55%. I believe it's about a little over $200 million in ratepayer benefits to that. So it really is good for the ratepayers to increase the system utilization because the utilities revenues are fixed. Any increased revenue that they collect above that, they have to get back to the ratepayers. So the heat pumps actually help your electric rates come down. Next slide, please. So heat pumps, I'm sure John will get more into this. Heat pump technologies, the fundamental technology shift here is that rather than burning something to create the heat, whether it's oil, propane, wood, gas, or anything else, coal, we're just transferring heat from one place to another with a heat pump. And the heat source and sink could be the ground. The ground source heat pump could be air or water. So ground source or water source, they achieve high efficiencies, but they transfer heat from the ground into the building. So in the wintertime, it's actually taking the heat out of the ground. Again, John will get more into that in terms of the constant temperature. And then in the summertime, it's taking heat out of the building and putting it down in the ground. And I'll leave that for John to explain why it's just so efficient using the ground source heat pumps. And air source heat pumps transfers heat between the house and the outdoor air. It's less efficient than ground source, but just from a physics standpoint, you're trying to take air that could be plus 100 degrees or minus 0 degrees to a comfortable 72 degrees. It takes a lot more energy to do that as opposed to the constant temperature of the ground. Next slide, please. So these are just the technologies, clean heat and cooling technologies. On the left side is the air source heat pumps. It could be central ducted or central ductless. They're just central system. The other one is the ductless mini splits. I think that's what's really selling. That's the dominant technology that's being sold in the market. And we typically, with our strategy right now, based on our incentives, is to displace the current system. So you leave the current system and you use this as a supplement. We really want to move to more whole house solutions, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. That tank there is a heat pump water heater. On the going to the right in the middle there, I put a VRF system. The reason it's the middle, the one that's pictured here is an air source VRF system, but it also can be ground source, so or water source to power. And the same rule applies to ground source and air source. The ground source VRF is more efficient than the air source, just again from the physics that I mentioned. And on the right-hand side is the ground source heat pumps and the systems. And on the top, it could be various loop fields, loop configurations, vertical, slinky, horizontal, pond, or direct exchange. Not too many of those, and we don't really push a lot of it, but not, and an open loop. Those are the two that we don't push a lot, not a whole lot of them out there, but it still can be used. Next slide. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about some of the programs that we currently have for clean heating and cooling, with a caveat that these incentives will expire at the end of the year, and I'll get into the reasons why. So next slide, please. So before I get to the actual incentives and the programs, these were the barriers to adoption that we wanted to address. The first and foremost is the high first cost. We know that it is more expensive than traditional systems, so the first cost is a huge barrier, and that's what we're trying to do with some of these incentives to buy down that first cost, but make it a little more, cost effective. And the sort of formula that we use to come up with the incentives is trying to find an incentive that is based on the current costs and capital expense of these systems to get it to like a 16%, they call hurdle rate ROI, which translates to about a 6-year payback. That's what we're trying to get to with the incentive. So we just don't pick a number and say, listen, incentive. We're trying to get the buyer of the equipment to someplace to a ROI that we think is really good and reasonable, which I think a 6-year payback is a good one. The other barrier that we're facing is limited training, available for installers, engineers, designers, project managers, architects. It's just, you have the International Ground Source Heat Pump Association, various training programs for installers and designers. For air source heat pumps, it's mostly manufacturer training, so we're really trying to address the training aspect. And we have several ponds. It's not part of this presentation, but we do have several workforce development ponds. I may punt it to John to talk a little bit about that because he's taken advantage of it. And then lack of knowledge and awareness of heat pump technologies, clean heating and cooling technologies. I'm finding that really prominent as we deal with the moratorium area in Westchester, in that they like say, we want our gas. I said, well, we don't know anything about heat pumps. Do they work? So once you ask the question, do they work, and what are they? You got to spend a little time trying to address that. Next slide. So on this page is the some of the heat pump incentives. So we do have an air source heat pump incentive. The budget is about $10.9 million, and it's currently the incentive is $500, but that actually goes to the contractor. They can pass it on; they're not required to, but we suggest that they do. It just so happened that the best performing contractor in our air source heat pump program actually is passing that $500 on to the customer, which we really like. On the ground source heat pump side, it was a $15 million budget over 2 years. It started in, I think, July of 2017. It's expected to expire and end in June of this year, in a couple months. However, we are extending that program to the end of 2019, and I'll give you the reasons why in a couple slides. The incentive here is for residential or any installations under 10 tons, which is mostly residential or some small commercial, is $1,500 per ton. and we capped that out at $15,000, a 10-ton system. And for commercial or anything greater than 10 tons, the incentive is $1,200 per ton, and we do cap it at $500,000 per building and $1 million per site with multiple buildings on that site. Next slide, please. Also, this is the one that I'm really, exponentially proud of, the Clean Heating and Cooling Communities campaigns. For those of you who may be familiar, this is really modeled off of the NYSERDA's Solarize program, where it's really a community-based program. Only community-based organizations or municipalities can apply for this, for the funding here. And it really is to help reduce soft costs. It's reduced installation costs, sales costs, acquisition costs by getting community-based organizations to bring residents in the community together to hear and learn about clean heating and cooling technologies. Vet contractors who we hope will offer some kind of discount or some offer doing this promotion, and hopefully cluster some of those sales and installations to help reduce costs. So we're trying to reduce acquisition costs and potentially installation costs if we can get a block of people saying they want to install heat pumps, similar to gas. If one home on a block wants the gas, they're going to have to probably pay $15,000, $20,000 and get all their neighbors to sign up and get gas. They can probably get it for free. The other one is the Geothermal Clean Energy Challenge. That's a program we're doing in partnership with the NYPA, New York Power Authority, and this is to install geothermal in large state, local government buildings. And the criteria to enter this program is a minimum 100 tons, which is about close to 50,000 square feet, so much larger buildings. Next slide, please. Another one we have, this is the, so actually go back. So the incentives for the ground source and the air source, that really is to address the high first cost. So we're trying to bring down that first cost. So the average home, we don't have to go back to the slide. So let's say for geothermal, it's $1,500 per ton. Average home's about 4 tons, so or 5 tons. So let's say the average incentive is between $6,000 and $7,500. So that's actually pretty good buy down. The air source heat pump is just $500 per unit, but again, I'll get to another slide which addresses that as well. So the good news is that we're extending this program to the end of this year. Next slide, please. Oh, you went back. Okay, you did go back. Okay, so now to address awareness, it's the co-op advertising and training, and this is addressing the lack of trained installers, where we put out about $1.5 million, and this is for co-op advertising. It's cost share 50-50 with contractors and distributors to do local marketing and advertising. So they want to run an ad in a local newspaper or whatever. They send a copy of the ad to us. We'll vet it, send it to our marketing group, and we'll cost share 50-50 if we think it's it's an appropriate ad. And for training, with manufacturers, we can and contractors and distributors will cost share 50-50 up to $50,000. Same thing with the co-op advertising, $50,000 per year for training, and it's any kind of training that they want to do. And actually, we're close to running out of money there, so that's actually been a very successful program so far. And the next gen, that's just our R&D. We're really trying to see what the next gen solutions are. So we're looking at all sorts of different things, from the antifreeze that's used in the loop fields to cold climate heat pumps to, boy, oh boy, so many the drilling techniques, whatever, the whole gamut. We're open to looking at new and innovative technologies that could help us scale, but also help reduce costs and improve performance. Next slide, please. So, in December of 2018, the Department of Public Service issued an order. The order was titled Order Adopting Accelerated Energy Efficiency Targets. It's a pretty lengthy document, but what's relevant here is that in the order established a target for the utilities to get 31 trillion TBTUs of consumer level energy reductions, statewide from utilities. However, within that, at least 5 TBTUs of the 31 in reduction needs to come through heat pump deployment. So this is really great news for the heat pump industry, that the DPS, the regulators, are basically directing and instructing the utilities to that part of their the order and part of the initiatives that they want them to roll out, and certainly in terms of reducing the the TBTUs or the BTUs, has to come from heat pumps, and a pretty significant piece coming from heat pumps. And I think that equates to maybe 80 plus, between 80 and 100,000 residential homes. So if we can pull that, and that's through 2025, the programs will be from 2020 to 2025. So that's why we're extending our program through to the end of 2019, and then the utilities, will take over from 2020 to 2025. So I'll speed up my talk here and run through the rest of it. So I'll do double time here now. Okay, go ahead, John. And you can give me the hook anytime, Betta. Oh, so Westchester, you really want to hear about Westchester, so let's go to the next slide. And so Westchester, kind of imposed a gas moratorium. We've issued a what we call a Westchester Clean Energy Action Plan, but we're going to actually drop Westchester off and just call it the Clean Energy Action Plan, and help areas that are impacted by gas moratorium. So you're hearing this for the first time here. And really, we're trying to help lower energy costs, promote economic development. That's the biggest issue. And in particularly Westchester, the focus is on new construction. That's one of the biggest areas of concern there. So some of these new projects get gas, but we really want to promote and support them getting heat pumps, and obviously do a lot of community outreach and support. Next slide, please. So what we're doing, again, this is for the gas constrained areas only. In commercial, I mentioned we had $1,200 per ton. We're increasing the incentives by 25% to $1,500 per ton. And I mentioned we had a cap of 500,000 and $1 million. We just put, again, this is only for the gas constrained moratorium areas. The cap now is $5 million per project. And we're going to be offering free feasibility screenings for buildings 25,000 square feet or over. For residential, same thing, increasing the incentive by 25%, from 1,500 to 1,850, 875 rather. And for residential, they are now eligible for our financing. We call it Green Jobs, Green New York loans, where they have two options. They can do unbilled recovery, where they pay through their electric bill, or regular straight loan. Next slide, please. I think I'm just about done now anyway. For air source, we're also offering free screenings for these large buildings. It's mostly VRS, but for residential, this is something new. We're actually introducing a new incentive, and this is statewide, by the way, of $1,000 per ton for whole house air source heat pump systems. So this can be ducted or ductless or mixed, ducted with ductless, but got to be a whole house solution. They have to issue the contract, have to issue a manual J, and it's similar to ground source, where the load has to cover at least a minimum of 90% of the full load, a maximum of 120% of the full load. And we're working through this. It's not official yet, but I have it in here. So this is a presentation we did to Westchester, so it is probably, it is coming soon, where air source heat pumps will now qualify for our loan program, which is a good thing. Next slide, please. Community support, what we've done with Sustainable Westchester, they were focused on an area in northern Westchester which did not have gas, which made sense. Once the moratorium hit, we've actually expanded the scope of their contract, added money to the contract, and we're now asking them to develop some promotions and some campaigns down in the moratorium area. And then on April 24th, we're not hosting it, it's hosted by a local organization. We are sponsoring it along with the Westchester County, and we're bringing large developers and municipal officials to meet and speak to who we believe are some of the best minds and companies in the clean energy space, particularly large-scale geothermal and VRF systems. And actually, the day before that, on the 24th, we're hosting an event to talk about the workforce development needs in Westchester. And the response was so overwhelming, we actually had to get a bigger room to hold all the people that are interested in it. So that's the big issue there: economic development, creating jobs, and having something that's reliable, affordable, and viable, as an alternative to gas. I think that may have been my last slide, but let's see.
All right, perfect.
Was that slide? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Donovan. Donovan, the director of the Clean Heating and Cooling Program at NYSERDA. That was a very thorough overview of NYSERDA's clean heating and cooling programs, and really exciting to hear the news about the brand new air source heat pump incentive.
Yep.
I wish it had been available when we installed air source heat pumps at my house, but I'm glad for everyone else who can take advantage of it. Really great. Thrilled about that, and also increasing the incentives in Westchester and hopefully other places too. So that's terrific. Thank you so much, Donovan, for all of your amazing work. And folks can, enter questions into the Q&A for Donovan, and we'll have everybody answer questions at the very end. Also, I just want to apologize because I realized that we were muting the video accidentally. That was the first time we ever played a video when we were doing a Zoom meeting here, so forgive us for that. So now I want to just pass it off to John Ciovacco, who is the president of Aztech Geothermal, a thriving geothermal company in the Capital Region in Hudson Valley. And John, you can talk about your territory, but John's also a board member of New York Geo, which is a statewide network of contractors, and is also a member of our Renewable Heat Now coalition. So John, take it away.
All right, thanks Betta and Michaela. I am here in historic Ballston Spa, New York, with my rally signs behind me from different events that we go to. We're only about 12 people strong, but we work through a network of other contractors, through drillers, through other ductwork subcontractors. So we expand our reach quite a lot by working with lots of other companies. We've got about 400 heat pumps systems installed in the area since 2008, and that number is increasing much more rapidly than your first years where you only install a few. And it's been, the growth rates have really started to pick up. And I'm really excited about a lot of the work that NYSERDA is doing. The utilities are now involved. The communities programs, which is an outreach part of NYSERDA, are really coming together. One of the things when Donovan was talking, it made me think, is that we've taken advantage of the air source heat pump rebate program, the ground source heat pump rebate program, the co-op marketing program, the clean heating cooling communities program is about to start in our area. We're excited about that. The workforce development, we've had on-the-job training where we brought people in and part of their, half of their wage has been paid. We've also had a 90% paid for internship from a student. And we are working in the next gen program, doing some fundamental work with new types of antifreeze. So, and I'm probably missing a couple, but there's lots going on, and I'm really grateful for Donovan and all the work that NYSERDA has been doing to help bring all that together. We actually serve customers, which is kind of great. This is a real family. These are not actors. And they are really, really thrilled with their second heat pump system. So they had an existing system, then we put a more advanced one in recently, and we gave them Customer of the Month. We just have a lot of fun with our billboard. Lots of people think that it doesn't really say anything, but we just think it's really funny. And some of the nice sort of co-op work and some of the great stuff is that video that we watched earlier, muted or otherwise, is the background for a piece that we sent out as a direct mail piece. And we co-branded it with National Grid, who's now involved, which is terrific. And so there's lots of things that are picking up, and contractors like us get lots of support now. Donovan made reference to this, but I think it's an important thing to sort of start with is the greenhouse gas inventory really tells us where our greenhouse gas emissions come from. And oftentimes there's been such a focus on renewable electricity, which is super important, especially as we get rid of fossil fuels in the building and in the transportation sectors. But we really have to focus on those big pieces. And so if homes and buildings are a big percentage, and as Donovan talked about, that space heating and water heating and space cooling account for most of that energy, it's really a core part of the strategy that New York is implementing, and heat pumps are really the heart of that solution, which is terrific. Yes, I stole Donovan's slide because I liked it better than mine. And so Donovan talked about some of the different types of heat pumps, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on in some areas. I think the centrally ducted air source heat pump, which is up in that left-hand corner there, that is something that is not seen in the market too much because the mini splits are so much more popular. They're very versatile, but they tend not to be whole house solutions. So that'll be good that some incentives move in that whole house direction, because that's how certainly lots of homes could use it. The air source heat pumps for water heating have become quite popular. There's lots of interesting economics around where those work well and where they don't work as well in different types of homes, but they're about half the cost and half the electricity of an electric water heater, and they don't use fossil fuels in their ability to make hot water. They're basically using the thermal energy from the basement as their source to make hot water. The bigger systems down there, the VRF, I have another slide about that, but that's certainly for larger commercial buildings and can be air source or ground source or water source. And then there's those different applications of ground source heat pumps that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. I'm going to focus more on closed loop because I really think that that is a more robust way to go, but that doesn't mean that the open systems or the DX systems can't work very well for certain applications. One of the things that I think when I think about heat pumps is that they have lower temperature heat. So a furnace and a boiler, we're burning something, we're combusting some type of fuel, oftentimes natural gas, oil, propane, and we're making really hot heat because it's fire. Heat pumps don't do that. Heat pumps work in a way that they take existing thermal energy sources that are really quite mild in temperature, and we extract energy from those mild temperature sources and we make it warmer, but we don't make it super hot. So when we see a baseboard water system, we need more surface area when we do it with a heat pump. So if we're heating water with a heat pump instead of a boiler, you'll see two sets of fins or much more surface area on the fins to make those work well. Radiant floors can be good applications because they have a lot of surface area. Radiant panels, which looks like a modern or European style radiator, those can work well because they have a lot of surface area. ductless systems, either with refrigerant systems like a mini split or through sending warm water to that ductless system and then to blow air over it. Sometimes it's called a fan coil. Those also can work very well because that mild heat, maybe 120 degrees, is plenty warm enough to heat the room. And if it goes directly into the room from a ductless system, it can make that room very, very warm. But we have to think a little bit about how we do that. Centrally ducted systems are probably the most common in new residences, certainly, not so much older residences. But those systems, we certainly need to make sure that that mild temperature heat, that those duct systems are particularly good, probably a little better quality than a combustion system needs to be. And then also that they're sized properly for the volume of air. We need more of a mild temperature air to heat a room in terms of volume and run times than we do, say, an oil system might have 140 degrees entering the room from an air register. A heat pump system might be more in the 90, even 80, 85 degrees. You can get a room to 70 with 85 degree air for sure, but you're going to have longer run times. You're going to need a little bit more volume of air to do it. So there's some things that we need to learn as heating and cooling professionals when we apply heat pumps that are different, especially in heating, than we did before. Oh, wrong way. Let's go into the physics of it all. We won't go into too much of this, but essentially a heat pump system is taking a mild source of energy, which is down on one side, the low temperature heat absorbed from the source. So we have tubes that are out in the ground. They're circulating oftentimes a water solution. That water is bringing the thermal energy in and it's going over these coils that have refrigerant in them. Those cause those to evaporate. That's the evaporator. That's still a mild temperature that now the energy is in the vapor. The compressor makes it warm. We use electricity to do that. The condenser takes that warm, now really gets hot, maybe 160 down to maybe 120 degrees. Then that's really something we can heat a room with. So we're going to blow air over that. We're going to put water over it. Some of the things that make these systems work particularly well is you'll see the Q1, Q2, and Q3. Q1 is the source of energy, but it's usually a low temperature source. Q2 is oftentimes, in our case, electric energy to the motor on the compressor. And Q3 is the addition of those two. So we're paying for Q2, but that's the small amount of energy. We're getting either energy from the ground or from the air. And oftentimes we're not paying extra for that. So we have coefficients of performance are things, so a ground source heat pump might have a coefficient of performance of 4, meaning that 3 units come, say, from the ground of heat and 1 unit comes from electricity. An air source heat pump might be 2.5. So we've got, for every 1 that we get from the electric grid to drive that compressor, we get 1.5, sometimes in certain conditions 2. So we're going to have really effectively 400% efficiencies for ground source, 250% efficiencies for air source. Those are terrific numbers. Now, they're way better than the efficiencies of combustion sources, but whether they're cost effective has a lot to do with the price of electricity and then the price of whatever fuel that you're replacing them with. So it's a little more complicated than that. A lot of the energy that the ground source system will use comes from the sun. So the sun will heat the ground absorbs a lot of that energy, and then it's stored. So when it's negative 25 degrees in Saratoga Springs and one of our homes is heating with a heat pump, a ground source heat pump, it's basically tapping into solar energy that was stored earlier in the season. So it's a terrific battery, and it gives us the ability to run these heat pumps even when it's very, very cold out at very high efficiencies. Closed loop systems, we bury them in the ground. So horizontal systems in this area tend to be about 6 feet deep and over a large area. Vertical systems tend to be quite deep. So a single family home, just for instance, might have 1 500-foot borehole would be kind of a common amount. You might have 2 350s, depending on the size. You might have smaller ones, but about 1 borehole, but it's deep, more like a water well. But they're not wells. We're going to grout them in, and we're going to have a closed loop of water that goes down into the ground pulls thermal energy up into the house, and then the heat pump will extract it. We have a number of pond loops. We probably have 12 or 14 pond loops. When someone has a pond that's proximate to their house and it's the right depth and size, that can be an excellent source and can be less expensive to install because you have less drilling or excavation. Direct exchange I have there, that's where you usually use shorter bores. You're using copper tubing, and that copper tubing has actually the refrigerant that's in the heat pump in it. So it's either the evaporator or the condenser at different times of the year. So it's not doesn't have a water heat exchanger in it. It's called direct exchange. There's oftentimes a much smaller footprint can be used. As you see it splay out in lots of different directions and kind of like a spider there. So the footprint of those can work really well, and in certain soil conditions can be really cost effective to install. This is a real system. So you'll see that there's a ground loop that's outside, and there's 4 trenches of that that we buried at about 6 feet. And then it comes into the house and goes through that black box kind of in the middle of the screen, has a pump on it, and that's going to bring that energy from the ground to the heat pump and then back out to the ground after the heat pump extracts it. But it looks a lot like a furnace. In fact, that one's called a water furnace. So they end up being things that if you walk past them, unless you were really looking for it, you wouldn't see it. It's just something that that blends right in and fits in just like any other heating or cooling piece of equipment. And as a result, lots of contractors are able to install these things. It's not really a terribly specialized skill once you get a little training. The systems are reversible, so they heat and cool. So we focus a lot on the heating in this climate zone because that's where most of the savings comes from. That's where most of the greenhouse gas reduction comes from. But as Donovan mentioned, the cooling side of it can be terrific because there's peak load reduction. So they use less in terms of, they use less electricity on those super cold, or rather super hot days, hot and humid days where the grid is very stressed. We're at the limits of our capacity from our electric delivery systems. And it's because of air conditioning loads. A ground source heat pump might have 40 or 50% less load on that same day. Air source heat pumps are getting that source energy from outside. So we're blowing, even when it's really very cold out, and you'll see I have -13 there. You know, negative temperatures blowing over these evaporators, they're still able to extract thermal energy, and then the compressor makes it warm enough to heat that room. And that particularly works well in a ductless situation because you don't have any losses from the distribution. You basically, every bit of heat that you can extract out of it, you get to put right into the house. On a bigger scale, there's, this is sort of like maybe mini splits on steroids. So you've got basically base units like that unit that you saw outside, and they can extract thermal energy from the air and then distribute it to many different places within the building. Many of these systems use refrigerant to distribute to those different places in the building, and there's systems now that have been developed and are now being installed in Europe especially that have a water distribution after they do that to many different rooms. And you can simultaneously heat and cool. You'll see vaguely in this picture, some of those units have blue coming out of them like they're cooling, and others of them have red. So you can have a single heat pump and it's heating one room while it's cooling another. And there's terrific efficiencies in that because that room that's cooling is throwing heat off that can be then used in another room. Lots of people want to know, what does it cost? I made a quick adaptation on here, so I have a couple of awkward pastings. But depending on the price of fuel and your price of electricity, you'll get something like this. So a therm is 100,000 BTUs. So how much does it cost? So a geothermal system and a natural gas system, even with its super high efficiencies for geothermal in our state, they're about equal at, you know, today's prices in a lot of parts of the state. So they're both low, both inexpensive, but geothermal doesn't save a natural gas customer money on operating. An air source heat pump uses more electricity to do what it does, but it can still show a savings over oil and propane systems, which are above it. And then you'll see an electric system, like an electric baseboard system, that's still 100% efficient, literally. We won't get into efficiencies and how they work, but it's not cost effective. When electricity prices are in the 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour like they are up here, and even more expensive downstate, electric baseboard isn't so good because you need a lot of electricity. You're not leveraging it all. You're basically just using that electricity to create heat directly. You're not leveraging it to get renewable thermal energy out of the ground or the air. Now, the other big benefit that gets talked about a lot is how do we reduce carbon? And it's relative to other things and how much do you give off. Now, air source heat pumps and geothermal systems certainly can have no carbon footprint if you have 100% renewable electricity that comes to those. Natural gas and propane and oil struggle with that. There are certain biogases and things, and we can do some math on that, but there's a carbon footprint related to burning those fuels on site. Electric, by the way, if you just use electric baseboard, there's a carbon contribution to grid electricity. And if we use enough of it, it turns out that is not a particularly clean technology to use unless you have a tremendous amount of renewable electricity to offset it. We've got a big conference coming up, April 10th and 11th, so really soon. And we've got 3 tracks for 2 days of educational sessions. And we've got the president of Con Edison will be speaking, and John Rhodes, the chair of the Public Service Commission, will also be speaking. So we've got a big show going on. Donovan and his crew will be there en masse. It's in Schenectady, New York at the Rivers Casino. But you don't need to go to the casino. You can just go to the geothermal thing. And that is one of our systems. So that's a 4-ton variable speed system with a 2-tank desuperheater for hot water. That concludes my remarks.
Great. Thank you so much, John. That was terrific. And I highly recommend the New York Geo conference. This will be my 3rd year going, and I always learn a ton. So check it out if you can. We can also send a link to it in our follow-up email, which will include this recording as well. So now I'm going to pass it off to Zeyneb Magavi, who is joining us from Boston, from her electric car, no less. She's a woman on the move, and I love that you're in your car and have managed to make time to present your very exciting work that you're doing there in Boston. So thank you so much, Zeyneb, and I'll hand it off to you.
I'm going to hit share screen and hope it works. Let's see. One second. Oh, and
you got it.
Yeah, I'm of course right in the middle of my presentation, so we'll just get a backwards preview here.
That's okay. Everybody on this call is, an advocate, interested and patient, and just happy that you could join us. So
well, I'm really glad to join you guys, and I think everything that's going on is really exciting. I'm actually going to tell a little bit of a story. I'm going to try to do it very quickly to get to the meat of it, but I want to make sure you have the backstory because I think it's really interesting to have a possible solution come out of kind of grassroots action. And this is a Massachusetts-based story, but it doesn't have to be. So I represent both Mothers Out Front, which is a grassroots organizer, and also HEAT, which does a lot of research and innovation. And we've been working together on this, so it's jointly presented with 2 hats on. All of our work started with these rotten gas pipes in the ground leaking. And the reality of gas leaks was, nobody loves them. And so it became a great organizing tool that built a lot of power in Massachusetts. We were able to get our first law passed requiring the utilities to report all the leaks, which really started to change the narrative about gas. We also got a second law passed to get the largest emissions leaks fixed, again, changing the narrative to connect it to climate change. And in the process of doing this, we did research together with the gas companies to figure out how to do that, and built relationships with Columbia Gas, Eversource, and National Grid. These are the 3 presidents of those companies with some of us. we realized that ecosystem we built could be used to do something beyond just triaging. We'd been sticking Band-Aids on holes and gas leaks instead of transitioning off. And what we also saw happening in Massachusetts, and I know it's happening in New York as well, is that the old leaky gas pipes are getting replaced at an extraordinary cost with new gas pipes. And that money in Massachusetts is more than $9 billion.
Zeyneb, sorry to interrupt, but you just got a little muffled for some reason. I don't know if you moved or something, but now it's not, yeah, I don't know. It sounded good before, but it sounds a little muffled.
Oh dear.
Okay, there you go. You're back.
So good?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
All right. So this money being spent, we identified as a huge issue, a huge financial risk for us as citizens and ratepayers, and also for the industry, because it's $1.7 million per mile of new gas pipe that's last century's infrastructure going in, getting paid off over 40 years. And that 40 years, it extends past our greenhouse gas goals in the state that are mandated. So we're digging in stranded assets that we're all going to pay for long past we need them. So we asked ourselves, well, these plans that the gas replacement plans, we mapped them, and we identified segments that we could kind of prune the tree of the gas system and try piloting other solutions to show people that now is the time to move off and redirect all of that funding to renewable thermal solutions. So this is the launch of the Energy Shift project, and I'm presenting heat slides here. We looked first at the more obvious, solar, heat pump. Geothermal was very exciting to us for all of the reasons that have been presented, and they're all great solutions, but we were worried about trying to do it for the cost of those gas pipes, and also about the house-by-house approach and kind of an inequality of access to renewable energy, and how to approach the collapse of the gas industry. And these are complicated problems, and they raise the question of whether we should be doing renewable thermal at a household or at a utility scale. So we started looking around the world at utility scale thermal solutions. For example, we looked at Stockholm, which has district energy. And is it still clear? Or am I getting muffled again? Yeah, no, okay, good. So district energy, which is basically delivering either in the old days steam, but more modern district energy, hot water, low temperature hot water, to people's homes for their heating, and producing it usually centrally. In a place like Stockholm, they're gradually greening that production, but it is still fossil fuels, as in Denmark, where most of the population has this district heating. And it is more efficient. They have dropped their greenhouse gas footprint tremendously by doing this. But again, we're still generating that heat without, with some fossil fuel use. So in Paris, they're piloting geothermal powered small district energy, micro district energy systems. And that started to really perk our interest that perhaps this could be done renewably, that we could have thermal energy delivered to people's homes in a utility scale, renewable power.
Oh, you're going out again.
Yep, with renewable power. And so the challenge is, of course, that these examples in Paris were deep geothermal, which is very, very deep, very expensive, and really only works appropriately cost-wise in certain geology. So we also just didn't have the scale to build an entire district energy system. We couldn't convince anyone of that. And we did want to try replacing those gas pipes instead with hot water pipes. So we came up with the idea of doing very small street segment hot water loops with the hot water, or not hot water, but you can have cool as well, obviously, but with geothermal heat pumps using shallow boreholes in the gas company right of way. And using this renewable thermal network to deliver heating and cooling to customers' homes. It would be owned and installed and maintained by the ex-gas company that is then becoming a renewable thermal company. And as so many of the benefits of geothermal have been mentioned about reducing peak loads and generating both heating and cooling and all of this. So to skip quickly ahead to give you a better idea of this idea, we were still looking at those little branches that we had the opportunity to maybe change and had the funding we could redirect. And building one of these geothermal microdistricts, even allowing the gas backup as you move backwards, but in one segment, and then building more segments, a little bit at a time, interconnecting them and backing up, building a district energy system that is renewable and resilient, and also very efficient, kind of from the bottom up. So that's a really interesting idea that we got interested in and talked to a lot of people about. A lot of the gas companies were very interested. Our local agencies were interested, but it's still a really big thing to make happen. And we're approaching it on 3 levels. The first and most important level to us is actually on the household level, because if the consumer doesn't want to move off gas, it makes it harder. So we have been running Taste the Future cooking events, focusing on the gas stove transition to an induction stove, and are running a statewide competition for that first street segment to pilot our district energy, the geothermal idea. The Taste the Future parties ask everyone to just be ready to transition, to have a list on their refrigerator with their renewable ready appliance choices for when their appliance dies. On the infrastructure level, we've hired a global engineering firm, York.
We're having trouble hearing you again.
All right. Who's doing so Bureau Happold Engineering is doing our feasibility project. It will be complete in May, looking at the economics and the engineering for the state of Massachusetts and looking at what scale this could potentially be implemented in and the cost to consumers. You know, starting from the very basics, analyzing the geology, hydrology, energy use, etc. Looking at the ground temperature range, which was mentioned earlier, and all of the potential technologies, and really trying to put them together in a system to see how we can optimize the idea. And the last, and I suspect most important level, is the governance level. And having gotten, you know, law passed in 2014 and 16, we also got one in 2018, one part of which was a waiver from regulatory requirements in order to allow the pilot to go forward. But we need a lot more than that to make this idea work. We need to permit a gas company to bill for BTUs. We decided to create a renewable thermal credit market with a path to 80% by 2050 to match our state's targets. And also we decided to cut off gas infrastructure depreciation, that we should not be paying for gas infrastructure past our renewable targets. So that's a pretty bold act we're calling the Future Act, and it's supported in the idea of transitioning off gas in Massachusetts has become much more public friendly after the Merrimack Valley gas system collapse. People are interested in the idea of transitioning off gas in a way that they were not before. And that is driving a lot of the political support for this. I know that in New York, you also have a similar kind of all hands on deck moment with your moratoriums. And it does feel to me like across all of the states, there really is a moment of opportunity to drive renewable thermal forward right now. And these are pictures from a bunch of our larger alliance a couple days into Merrimack Valley's gas collapse, bringing induction cooktops to families to help them heat their heat water and bathe their children. And I think that that all hands on deck spirit is really where we're at. And if there's anything we're doing we can share with you, we're really excited to. So thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Zeyneb. It's really inspiring to see what you're doing, and you're not too far away. So we can do the same things here in New York. We just have to put our heads together, and I love your all hands on deck approach. So thank you for sharing. I know there's going to be lots of questions. And we only have 20 minutes left, or 22 minutes. We really were trying to wrap by 8:30. So I'm going to do a super fast introduction to Renewable Heat Now, because my Renewable Heat Now friends would be mad if I didn't say anything about our terrific campaign that we want all of you to get involved in, so we can expand these programs and accelerate adoption of heat pumps. So I'm just going to bang through this really quickly. Michaela, elbow me when I start to talk too much, because I really want to get to your questions. I saw we had about 20 questions in the queue, and I do want to respect everyone's time. So, okay. Many of these, luckily, you've already heard about our super ambitious goals. So we'll just, go through these. You've heard from everybody else about the importance of, getting off gas and on-site combustion of fossil fuels. How do we get there? How do we achieve these ambitious clean energy and climate goals? We've already touched on this as well: maximizing efficiency, electrifying everything, and of course, having 100% renewable grid one of these days. We're getting there. Hold on, my slides are not moving. There we go. Okay. Yep, 90% of households in New York still use fossil fuels, so we've got our work cut out for us. And I'm gonna actually just keep skipping because we've already talked all about this. So here we are, Renewable Heat Now. We're a coalition, and we work to reduce fossil fuels used for heating and cooling, educate people about heat pumps, accelerate heat pump adoption, and also advocate for policies that are going to make these technologies affordable for all New Yorkers. We've done lots of teach-ins and events all across the state. We had Jerry Acton from Physicians, Scientists, and Engineers do some research and come up with this number, which is a little bit higher than yours, Donovan. I believe that NYSERDA's estimates are that we need to have a 25,000 heat pumps need to be, or homes need to be converted to heat pumps. Jerry's number was a little bit higher, 200,000, but we know in any case, we have to go big. And even that 25,000 number that the state is currently working from is a 10-fold jump from where we are now. So we have to go big. Here's our platform: improving rebates and incentives, having additional incentives for low-income households. In the building codes that are going to be changed in 2021, we want to eliminate fossil fuel heating in new construction. And we want to reverse this policy that incentivizes customers to switch from fuel oil to natural gas. It says national gas, but it should say natural gas. Who are we? We are New Yorkers for Clean Power, Alliance for a Green Economy, Fossil Free Tompkins, Sane Energy Project, Frac Action, Heat Smart Tompkins, and York Geo. And we actually recently had Mothers Out Front and Earth Justice join our coalition as well. And I'm not going to go through all of this because we'll be here all night and I want to get to your questions, but we've had a very active few years. We got together in 2016 and had press events and organizing across the state to call on the governor and New York State to implement a really robust program. At the time, we were calling for a geothermal tax credit, but what we ended up with, which was even better, was a $15 million rebate program for ground source heat pumps, which was fantastic, and $11 million, which now is going up for air source heat pumps. So, what have we done? Tons of, press events, rallying, delivering petitions and postcards. We've gotten involved with rate cases. Members have become interveners in rate cases to really try to influence the utilities programs and again, address this issue of incentivizing gas and instead propose rates that would incentivize beneficial electrification, not only for heat pumps, but also for electric vehicles. but our focus tonight is on heat pumps. We were also very active in the lead up to the energy efficiency standard that was announced last Earth Day by Governor Cuomo, and we really were delighted that when that came out and was as robust as it was and had a lot of support for heat pumps. So we're waiting with bated breath to see what the utilities come out with at the end of this week, and we'll be following up with folks to let you know how you can continue to take action and make sure those programs are as ambitious as we need them to be. This what we're working on now, as I mentioned, rate cases. Really excited about the Westchester Clean Energy Action Plan and improving these incentives. Keep going. And of course, Heat Smart. Woohoo! Heat Smart campaigns are launching all across the state. Many of our Renewable Heat Now members are involved in their local communities. New Yorkers for Clean Power, we're a statewide campaign, but we are helping to launch the Heat Smart Ulster Sullivan campaigns. And basically it's similar to the Solarize model, which we were really involved in, and maybe many of you on the line were too. Basically it's a nonprofit state-supported program to educate people about heat pumps and help bring contractors to the community and make sure that people are aware of the incentives and have this trusted community source to make that connection between the contractor and the customer. And these campaigns are going to be operating in 8 regions across the state, and I think more are coming. So let me know if you want to get connected to one near you. Would love to help make that happen. There was even an event tonight with Heat Smart Central New York about heat pumps, and so some folks couldn't participate in this, but that's okay because it's being recorded. Okay, let's just keep going. I want to get to your questions and how to get involved. I guess the number one thing would be to join the Renewable Heat Now mailing list. You're not going to be automatically added to that. I will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this online teach-in with a link. If you would like to subscribe, it's not a heavy traffic email list. Oh, something's going on out there. We probably send emails once a month, and we would be happy to share our materials with you. We have a great petition, and would just love to stay connected. And that's it. So I think hopefully I did that relatively quickly. It was going to be a little bit longer, but covered the highlights. We continue to forge ahead and are really excited by the excellent news that Donovan announced tonight, and looking forward to continuing to accelerate the adoption. So let's get to questions.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of the questions are more about the technology, so I guess we'll start with some of those. Okay, does the hydraulic fracturing of geothermal drilling have any of the unfortunate side effects that come with hydrofracking for fossil fuels? Are there any ways to mitigate them? I've been wondering this for a while, thanks. Yeah, I think if you want to take that, John.
So I guess the quick answer is when we're drilling for a geothermal heat pump system, we're not using hydraulic fracturing techniques. Fracturing is used sometimes in the development of a water well because you're trying to get to free up the aquifer from some of the fracture zones, like you would with fossil fuel drilling, which is much deeper, where you're trying to get the fossil fuels to move out of fracture zones, hence the fracturing. So I think that, and it's probably a longer discussion that we won't do now, I think that there's probably a misconception about how geothermal drilling works, that we're not actually doing we're not fracturing because we're not trying to develop water from the wells. We're just trying to create a thermal exchange column that we oftentimes put a closed loop tube down. If you're doing an open system and you're dependent on water flow, you might choose to do some fracturing, but it's not the it's a relative to what they do in the natural gas and other fossil fuel drilling industries. It's a much less invasive process, but I would say open systems are less and less common. So the majority of what I think all of us that work in this have been talking about, and the emphasis is more on closed loop systems where you would never fracture.
Okay, thank you. And how feasible are heat pumps in New York City?
They're super feasible, but they might not be geothermal heat pumps. They might be air source heat pumps, or there's water source heat pumps where we're basically just using water, maybe throughout a building to share energy. So you might, like I mentioned, you might have one area of the building that's heating while another area of the building is cooling. The Empire State Building will have cooling going on in the center of that building almost all the time. If it's zero out, it'll have some cooling going on in a conference room that doesn't have any external windows because there's no place for the heat to go. It's insulated. So if you can take the thermal energy out of the center of the building and bring it to the parts that you need it, heat pumps are an excellent conduit for doing that. So there's also the concept of a heat map that I think we need to give more consideration to. So you look at a city like New York City and you say, okay, these buildings are heating while these buildings are cooling. How do we find a way to share energy either within buildings, adjacent buildings, buildings across the street if the loads are large enough? So heat pumps will play a big role in taking out fossil fuel heating, even in densely populated urban areas. But we have to kind of break down this, it's either air source or it's ground source. It could be any of those things, or it could be water source, where we're basically just sharing energy from one place to another and then turning it into the temperature, either cooler or warmer, that we needed in that place. And that's what heat pumps are excellent at doing. So it's that, I know that's not as direct an answer, but we need to stop thinking that the only way that we create heat is by burning fossil fuels. There's lots of mellow heat out there that we can use.
Zeyneb, do you want to chime in at all, being in an urban area and working on this?
You know what? I love that you're pointing out that heat is all around us, because the more we look at the potential for a thermal network where we capture the waste heat from our sewage and from our for example, data centers and other places, and redistribute it to where it's needed, the more efficient we are. We can really do a lot with that. So I'm excited about it. I think it's like an internet of energy, thermal energy kind of idea.
We're excited too.
Donovan, you might be able to give an answer for this next question. Can the Westchester action plan be expanded to other parts of the state, starting where there are gas curtailment issues and or where there are economic development opportunities that would otherwise require gas expansion?
The answer to the overall question would be no. Right now, we're doing this in the moratorium affected areas. We are considering expanding it to other areas that there is an active moratorium, but that, nothing beyond that other than the current incentive programs, which are actually pretty rich. In our ground source heat pump program, almost 80% of the installations in that program is in NYSEG and National Grid territories up north, so central and western New York and capital region. For air source heat pumps, the converse, 80% of the installs for air source heat pumps is in Con Ed territory in Brooklyn and Queens. So the answer is yes, air source heat pumps are right down in the city, particularly in the apartments. Some of them are used probably more for cooling than for heating, so we have to educate them on that. But heat pumps are applicable anywhere. Again, whether it's a combination of air source or ground source, it is a heating and cooling appliance that's applicable to any building type.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and shifting back to technology, what about combining heat pump systems with solar thermal?
I guess I can take that. we did a bunch of solar thermal hybrid systems where solar thermal would be the domestic hot water source, and then we had it interact with the geothermal ground loop. So from September, say sometime into May, if the solar thermal system overproduced, then it would divert the energy to warm that closed ground loop to give it extra thermal energy, sort of a short-term storage. I do think there's a lot of promise in that kind of thing. We do fewer of those, mostly because one thing is the solar thermal incentives changed, so that made the solar thermal equipment a little less cost effective. And then heat pumps are also able to make energy when you need it, and you don't need to worry about storage and overproduction. Solar thermal has this kind of problem in some ways, especially in domestic hot water situations where it does well. But in the summertime, you just have more thermal energy than you know what to do with. So since you can't, we have a lot of trouble storing thermal energy, for long periods of time. There are ways to do it, but it's awkward. It's not quite as simple as other technologies. So I do think solar thermal has a lot of merit, but with the electrification getting where it is and that we need more renewable electricity, a lot of people are opting to put more PV panels if they're doing solar, because they can use that electricity to run their car, they can use it to run heat pumps, they can use it to make hot water. And then they can also sell it back to the grid if you have a net metering situation. So I have to say, since the incentive levels went down, we're seeing less and less solar thermal, and then the complication of combining it. I think we need to be careful that we don't, even though we can do something, like as an engineer, I find this a lot, just because I can do something doesn't mean that it isn't overly complex, especially say for someone's home. We want to try to make these things, simple and reliable, and we need to be careful about not trying to make a science project out of things, which I might be apt to do occasionally.
Yeah, and this is Donovan. I'll add to that, John, just to put it in context. In the solar thermal incentive program, when we did have it, probably 90% of the installations were on farms, dairy farms, to hot water, to heat the water, to sterilize equipment. So from a residential standpoint, it really was not cost effective, and very few installations there.
Thank you. And this next question, Donovan might want to give a shot at answering. 100 million New York State dollars were and will be distributed among 10 communities for the DRI, Downtown Revitalization Initiative. I am concerned that many of the buildings being built or retrofitted will install natural gas heating. What can be done to ensure adequate energy efficiency and use heat pump technology?
Okay, so the New York City Mayor's Office, certainly Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and we got this, I guess, safe to renewable heat now, maybe you should stay close to this. They're looking to introduce local legislation, local laws about carbon emissions. They're looking to retrofit their city-owned buildings and electrify. Also, I'm on an advisory panel with Urban Green, where they're doing a study over the next year and a half on the electrification of buildings, particularly large multifamily buildings in New York City. So they're looking for how to install heat pumps, and also exploring the utilization of wastewater heat recovery as a heat source and sink for heat pumps. So I would say, as advocates, find out what's going on with this legislation with New York City local laws, and stay tuned to the report coming out of Urban Green. But the move, and New York City has their own 80 by 50 goal. And while we say that 30% of the carbon emissions in the state comes from buildings, in New York City, 70% of the carbon emissions comes from buildings. So when you extrapolate that out to the rest of the state, most of our carbon emissions coming from the city.
Thanks, Donovan. That's really helpful to flag the legislation in the city. And I know there is a lot happening right now with buildings and with Urban Green, that report coming out. So definitely we'll keep our Renewable Heat Now network in the loop as things develop on that front. I do believe that the person asking that question was actually referring to the downtown revitalization initiative that's happening across upstate. For instance, Kingston was a recipient, Binghamton was a recipient, you know, a bunch of other,
Yes.
you know, smaller cities upstate. And so I think her concern is that, you know, 100 million New York State tax dollars are going into this great revitalization program, but, you know, how can we ensure that those retrofits are going to be fossil fuel free when we have these ambitious state clean energy goals, and we want to make sure that our, you know, tax dollars are going to making sure that we meet them.
Well, I think that's going to be with your local organization. So that's where I'd reach out to the mothers out front. I certainly want to work with them in Westchester and other parts of the state, and the local community groups through our Heat Smart programs, where because these are local initiatives, right? So we have incentives. We're working with utilities to develop incentives. So we do have support to electrify the building and put heat pumps in there. We just have to, you know, and we don't know. At the local level, I think you should really be active in, you know, for lack of a better phrase, putting a little bit of pressure on so that when they retrofit, they do this. And the other way you can do this also too is with encouraging some of these local municipalities to change or introduce certain codes, building codes, permitting that, you know, buildings or retrofits need to be, you know, fossil fuel, with some kind of a clean solution. So it's a multitude of things, but that's going to have to be dealt with at the local levels. There's not much impact, certainly from my level, what I do, that can impact that, other than offering incentives to buy down the cost, training to train the workforce, and marketing to increase the knowledge and demand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful, and a good reminder about the importance of getting involved and taking action at the local level. So thank you. So it is 8:30. I know we have a bunch more questions, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We can capture the questions that are currently in the Q&A, and I can make sure that they get to the presenters and then follow back up with you. I think the only person that I'm really unclear about who it is at the anonymous attendee. So if you want to message us your email, we can make sure that we get your answers. I guess we'll since I'm not sure we'll ever hear from you, we will, let's just do one more question and to close out the night. I hate to end early, but we had so much information and not enough time for Q&A, but do want to thank everybody. And Michaela, you want to pick the last one?
Sure. I guess I could do this one.
Sure.
How close to the house does a pond need to be for pond loop heat pumps to be feasible and economical? And John.
Yes, that's me again. I'd like it to be 100 feet is a good number. When it gets to be 100, 200 feet, or say 300 feet, at some point, the excavation to get out to the pond becomes enough thermal exchange that there's no reason to go in the pond. So we're really doing it to try to save on excavation. So if it's not a relatively short run, sometimes it's easier just to keep a horizontal system near the house rather than extend it a great distance. Also have to be concerned about pumping energies and pipe sizes and things like that. So as the loop field can get further and further away, you can add a little pumping and complexity, or increases the expense of the pipe as you go to larger diameter pipes, which are quite a bit more expensive than the smaller ones that you might keep close in a horizontal system. So 100 feet is kind of my quick rule. I also like to have, if it's a single family home, if we're not getting close to maybe a quarter to half an acre, we're probably not looking at a pond that'll have really enough thermal energy. We don't really want to affect the pond in any significant way. So we want it to be just something that we take enough thermal energy to do what we have to do, but we don't affect the ecology of the pond. So we have to be a little bit careful that the pond is big enough, and you won't have really any effect, which most ponds are really. If you look at the heat pump manufacturers, they'll tell you need many more bigger ponds because they certainly see the problem with ponds too is sometimes you think the pond is good size and then you have a drought and the level goes down, and that's your thermal exchange for your house. That's how you do your air conditioning and your heating. So if you lose the water in the pond for some reason, now your geothermal system doesn't work. So, you know, ponds are a little bit tricky, but we've had a number of successful ones.
Great. Well, thank you. Zeynep, do you want to say one more thing?
Rivers are better because they flow. Sorry.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Merrimack River, and you can pull more temperature off a river because it's flowing past. So than I'm at the pond. Just
good to know.
Yeah.
So many ways to utilize our natural resources to create renewable energy. Oh, and actually, I have one more question that I'm glad I remembered to ask because someone was really wanting this question answered and couldn't join tonight. So this could be to any of you, actually. Why call it renewable heat when you're still on a dirty grid?
Okay, I guess I'll start off with that. Well, ultimately, the grid is going to get a lot cleaner. So yes, I understand that point. I call it, I changed the name from renewable to clean heating and cooling because we're really using an appliance, which is a heat pump. And the heat source in the sink could be the ground, the air, or water. So it's clean that there is no carbon emissions on site. And certainly if you have the power with the PV, then it's net zero. So there is no carbon. It is truly clean and I guess renewable because you have the solar PV.
Great. That's terrific. Thank you, Donovan. John, do you have any last words on that?
Yeah, the grid is definitely a consideration, especially, and we were starting to do some looking into, with renewable heat now, we were looking into the impacts of methane leaks and their contribution. So not only do we have the carbon impact of burning natural gas on site, but we also have the global warming impacts of having methane releases through the drilling and distribution of gas. So it turns out that even grid electricity that has some carbon contribution, it's offsetting the distribution and the combustion of fuel, it's still so much better over the course of, say, a period of time. So I really think that we want to try to get the grid cleaner and cleaner, and there's been lots of activity in that direction. But at the same time, if we can get combustion out of buildings very directly and we can use electricity to do it, it's almost always a net gain. If you had a coal-fired plant that was very inefficient and it had bad distribution losses to get there, electric cars and heat pumps don't do as well, but they still tend to be better. And New York State, upstate New York, has one of the cleanest grids. We're really lucky up here. As you get downstate, it gets a little dirtier, Long Island a little dirtier. But even in those cases, when you do the math, it's still a big net benefit to displace, say, 1,000 gallons of oil from a home. Even with the Long Island grid, it's a big advantage environmentally.
Great. And we got to make the grid even greener with more solar, more wind, more renewables. But that was a terrific explanation, John and Donovan. So thank you. And thank you everybody for joining, for sticking around here to the bitter end. We'll look forward to seeing you again in the future. We'll email you and let you know when the next one of these is happening, and also with some links to stay involved and share the recording and PowerPoints. So thanks so much. Have a great night. Thank you, John and Donovan and Zeynep.
Hey, thank you. You're welcome. Good night.
Good night.